All right. Welcome to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ewell. Today, we're going to be talking about lessons from my third fast of the year.
You are tuning in to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Jesse Ewell. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle. Let's go.
If you've been listening to our podcast, you may have heard about me doing a fast in January, did another one in February, and this is the third one of the year. And I really want to talk about just my experience in doing this, the lessons that I learned. And I feel like each time there's a new level of breakthrough, there's a new level of lessons, and I really want to share those. And so I do have some other episodes on this. If you go back probably 8 to 10 episodes, you'll probably hear some of the other ones. So if you're listening to this and maybe you're someone who's thought about fasting, maybe you're someone who's done it at one time, I highly recommend it because I feel like it's something that really helps us break down the physical component of food. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that, but this episode should paint this out a little bit. So this is my third fast of the year. The other ones I did the first one I did in January was 100 hours. This last one that I did in February was, I think it was 96, right around there. And then this one that I did, finished up today was 107. My goal was to go 110, but then I started to look at the rest of my day and be like, all right, do I want to eat in like 10 minutes? If I go to 110 hours, or do I want to enjoy my meal for breakfast? And so I kind of opted in to just sit down, enjoy my meal for breakfast. The first thing that I ate was an egg, cheese, and bacon burrito. Tasted amazing. But it's crazy when you fast how like the meaning of food begins to change. So I want to go through a couple things. So number one, what I learn is how much time and energy we spend on eating. And I'll just say for me, how much time and energy I think about eating, how much time and energy I spend on cooking, preparation, eating, all these things. I feel like I have, an extra 1 to 2 hours a day just by not having to think about eating, not having to prepare, not having to cook, and then not have to sit down and eat. And so maybe the biggest lesson is like how much time. And then also, when you're busy working, thinking about the next thing that you need to prepare to eat. And so food is kind of something that's constantly on your mind. You're constantly thinking about it. So that would kind of be the first lesson. The second one, and I've talked about this a little bit on the other ones, is like, as soon as you start to fast, it breaks down your physical nature, your physical cravings, and you begin to recognize things you crave. So social media comes up every time I've done a fast. Social media has always been something that comes up. And I begin to recognize how much time and energy I put into that. And it immediately makes me want to back away from it and not put as much time and energy into social media. It makes me want to do other things. And so that has been something that every time I fasted, that came up. Is like, hey, do you really need to be on social media this much? Is there a better way to do what you're doing? And so you start breaking down kind of those things. Where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your energy? And what are things that you need to get rid of? The other thing is I started a few weeks ago walking with a weighted vest. First thing in the morning is the first thing I do. And I kind of kept up with my normal schedule. So a lot of people ask like, hey, do you work out? Do you kind of do everything you normally do? I keep everything exactly the same. My workouts, this morning and every morning for the last, I think it's been 16 days, I went for a walk with a weighted vest. But what I noticed is on that walk, a lot of times I'll be listening to music, worship music. A lot of times I'll listen to, videos. I'll listen to audios. I'll listen to podcasts. And after the first day, I was kind of like, maybe I don't need to listen to anything today. And so I kind of like didn't listen to anything. And I really focused on, prayer for that 45-minute walk. And I kind of did that the last 3 days. And I felt like I needed to remove the noise that is constantly being on and constantly being put in front of me. So like the society we live in today, if you think about it, is a constant distraction. We're constantly bombarded with news. We're constantly bombarded with media. We're constantly bombarded with having to listen to something, watch something, look at something that we don't actually sit back and sit in nature anymore and be with ourselves, our own thoughts, just our own, conversation. And then to be able to really tune in to, God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and really begin to hear, the things that he's saying. And so this allowed me for these last 3 days to just tune everything out and really just focus in on that, to be able to listen, to be able to worship, and to be able to just talk. But I began to recognize like, hey, our society is driven off of distraction, and it's a constant distraction to distract us from, hearing, that voice. And that's one of the things that I really learned in this one, was how much we can be distracted in that and how we can just clear that away. And so that's been really powerful. And those are some lessons that I think every time I've done it, I've started to recognize. But this time it really started to sink in and make sense. It's like, hey, we're in a society right now that distraction is maybe our greatest enemy that we're up against. And the more that we allow ourselves to be distracted, the less productive we are, the less we get done, the more agitated we are, the more angry we are, the more we're driven by feelings and emotions versus being driven by, things that we actually want to accomplish. And so, we have goals right here on each side, but then we have this distraction in the middle that's called media, social media, even music, or even like kind of like books, listening to podcasts. Like we're constantly listening to messages, that information, there's no shortage of information being thrown at us, but we have to begin to unplug from that for a period of time, to sit with our own thoughts, to sit with God, and really like get the messages that we need. So I'm going to walk you through a couple other lessons. So this one was, what's stopping you from removing fear in your life? And here's what I thought about. So the first two fasts that I did, I used bone broth, chicken broth, that did have protein. So although it wasn't maybe a true fast, what most people would say, it was a fast because I fasted from all food. The only thing I allowed myself to have is bone broth or water. And one of the things that I thought is like, man, if I just eliminate all food, I'm going to lose a bunch of lean muscle mass. And then, oh my gosh, what's that going to do? So the first two that I did, I had bone broth. The problem is this time I cut out bone broth and I'm like, man, this is going to be so much harder. It was actually easier. Bone broth made me crave more food. I feel like it was 10 times harder doing bone broth the last 2 times versus just not doing any of it at this time at all. And so, the truth was, hey, it was easier to do it without it. Yet I had this fear that I'm going to lose all this lean muscle mass, which I didn't lose any. Okay, I lost a pound or 2 pounds. Like that could easily go back on within like a day or two, just based off water. So I had this story that kind of kept me from doing it the way it was supposed to be done. And I shifted that story. I shifted those things and kind of removed the fear. And then I'm like, well, hey, where else in my life am I, having fear get in the way of what I actually want to accomplish? And so sitting in that, you begin to kind of think about other things. The other thing is action is always the antidote for change. So even one of the things that I see with business owners is they want to change, but they don't want to change the action that they're taking. And even living a habit-based lifestyle, sometimes that we can get so ingrained in our habits that even if I'm doing a habit on a day-to-day basis, if I don't begin to take action, if I don't begin to take a different action, I'm not going to get a different result. And so action is really that antidote for change. What I see a lot of times in the business space is business owners are stuck because they stop moving. They stop moving because they're paralyzed to take action. And they're hesitating. They're doing all these things, and it's working against growth. It's working against the changes that they want to make. And so a lot of times when we remove the physical barriers, we can begin to we can begin to take action. We can begin to change and shifting, and we can really take, we can take more action just by not living in our head anymore. We can take action by actually moving in our body. And so, my biggest thing with any entrepreneur I work with is I usually ask them hey, how active are you on a day-to-day basis? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, are you sitting down a lot? Are you in a confined space? And a lot of times I find that most of the business owners I work with are probably taking between 5,000 and 6,000, maybe 7,000 steps a day, which means that they are not moving on a day-to-day basis, which means they're getting stuck in their thoughts, stuck in their stories, stuck in their feelings. They're not taking action, and they're paralyzed to do any of those things. And so change becomes very hard in that place. And so, action, yes, everybody's always talking about action, things like that, but even the wrong action is still better than no action at all. And this is the number one antidote for change. I think the last part is when you remove the physical barriers, the mental and spiritual components of what you're doing begin to open up. So, I've done a lot of training with Navy SEALs, military, and I think one of the first things they always work on is removing the physical barrier, breaking you down physically to get to the mental and spiritual side of you to see how disciplined or mentally strong you are, spiritually strong. And fasting is a way to do that, but I actually think it's on a whole different level. I could sit there and get beat down physically by any workout, but you begin to remove food and different things come up because we're no longer physically operating at a different level. So we can get agitated easier. We can get angrier. We can be a lot of the things that we maybe normally wouldn't because we're removing something we normally have. And so you have to kind of work through that, with yourself. Is hey, being impatient, maybe with your kids, or maybe making things really big that normally wouldn't be because you don't have food. It really allows you to look at hey, how am I showing up as a husband, father, leader, businessman for my kids, for my employees, for my wife, for my clients, all those things. And I began to kind of look at myself and look at the nature, how I'm showing up and how I could show up better. And that is a really powerful place to be. So these are some of the lessons I learned from the fast that I just did this time. Again, we stopped at 107 hours. If you guys want to be part of our next group for April, you can just simply find a link in the show notes. I'll get you set up in our chat group. Would love to have you in our fasting group for the next round. And hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day and week. If you have any questions, reach out to me, Jesse at habitbasedlifestyle.com. Until next episode, have a great day.
You are tuning in to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Jesse Ewell. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle. Let's go.